Amber Heard and the Johnny Depp trial, the libel trial. Now, what happened here was a few years ago, Amber Heard wrote a piece for the Washington Post in which she wrote, 2 years ago, I became a public figure representing domestic abuse. Now, it didn't actually mention Johnny Depp in the article, but his lawyer said it was about him and was defamatory, and as a consequence sued Amber Heard. Now, it was a jury libel trial, and they found in favor of Johnny Depp. I mean, we're talking $15 million. I mean, there was one ruling in favor of Amber Heard that one of the agents of Johnny Depp had defamed her. Now, let's just have a quick look at a little bit of that verdict.
All right, Mr. Foreperson, is this the verdict of the jury? Yes. All right, is it unanimous? Yes. Thank you, sir. Jamie?
In civil case number CL 2019-2911, Mr. Depp's claim against Ms. Heard. 1. As to the statement appearing in the online op-ed entitled, "Amber Heard, I spoke up against sexual violence and faced our culture's wrath. That has to change." In the Washington Post online edition, quote, "I spoke up against sexual violence and faced our culture's wrath. That has to change," end quote. Do you find that Mr. Depp has proven all the elements of defamation? Answer, yes.
Now, we've got the brilliant writer, Lucia Osborne-Crowley, whose tweets on this I've read all the way through the trial. So it was just, absolutely brilliant reporting of what was actually happening. I didn't watch the trial myself, so it was brilliant to be able to read somebody who watched it and went through all the evidence and is an all-round expert on the issue. So, Lucia, it's great to see you. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you for having me. And I must say, there's absolutely nothing I would rather be doing to avoid celebrating the Queen's Jubilee than talking to you.
Bless
so
you. Right back at you. Great to share a not celebrating the Jubilee together. So in terms of it, let's just I guess a quick kind of response, because in terms of what, I found the coverage of this deeply disturbing, and not least on social media. And what people have said now, what a lot of people concluded, well, look, the jury was presented with the evidence. They had to sit through it all, and they found in favor of Johnny Depp. Therefore, he's absolved, and others, obviously, the argument then is actually Amber Heard is the abuser. What do you say to all of that? That's the narrative now, which has become so dominant. What do you say to that?
Well, I think this is really concerning because the problem with that narrative that we've seen in the media, and as you say on social media in particular, is that it's lifted directly from the arguments made by Johnny Depp's lawyers. And it doesn't actually comport with the evidence that the jury saw. So Johnny Depp's lawyers strategically went into this case, so instead of making an argument that was basically, rather than looking at the evidence of abuse, because in a defamation trial, in order for there to be defamation, the statement that Amber Heard made about being a victim of abuse has to be false. But instead of specifically engaging with that, Johnny Depp's team, right from the get-go, decided to kind of reverse the narrative and say, actually, I'm the victim here. And, Amber Heard was abusive to me. And, that's his lawyer's prerogative. But it was it was repeated in the media without much scrutiny. And I think that's a real problem, because her legal arguments and what she presented at trial certainly wasn't recreated in the media in the same way that his was. And that created a very, very one-sided conversation, which actually distracted, to my mind, from the evidence and from the actual question for the jury, which was there ever a time in which Johnny Depp was abusive towards Amber Heard? That, even if there was strictly legally, even if there was one instance of abuse, physical, psychological, sexual, anywhere on the spectrum of abuse, then legally the jury shouldn't have found in favor of Johnny Depp on all three counts. However, Johnny Depp's lawyers did a really great job of replacing that question with this kind of a separate question about, who is to blame in this relationship, which is, that's not a legal question, and it's certainly not the legal question that we have here. And what we have as a result of that is a jury verdict that, if you watch all the evidence that she presented, is really hard to square with how much evidence she has that she was in fact the victim of abuse.
Can you explain to people how it's possible that Johnny Depp lost his libel case against the Sun newspaper when they called him a wife beater, and we now have another libel case with a completely conflicting outcome?
So this is something I really, really think we need to keep talking about, because in all the coverage I saw of the US trial, there was scant discussion about the UK decision. And again, this is something that Johnny Depp's lawyers wanted from the beginning. They wanted it not to be part of the conversation at all, and largely succeeded. And that's a real problem, because, as you say, we now have two decisions, one from the UK High Court, which has more weight in terms of precedent than the District Court in Virginia. And we have two completely conflicting outcomes. Here in the UK, we had a long trial. My colleagues at the Living News Agency that I work for were there every day. Johnny Depp gave evidence, Amber Heard gave evidence. We heard evidence about exactly the same alleged instances of abuse. And in that case, it was a bench trial, which means we have a judge making the decision rather than a jury, which is more common here for libel cases. And that judge resoundingly said that this was not defamation because it was true, because Amber Heard had proven to him that Johnny Depp had abused her 12 times. So he said on 12 instances of physical abuse, those facts had been made out. Now we have a jury decision that goes completely the other way. And firstly, I think the main way to explain that is the judge versus jury question. So here in the US trial, we had a presentation of the evidence that was really geared towards a jury decision, because it was about these kind of competing narratives and this idea that Johnny Depp's lawyers were able to kind of reverse the victim and offender roles, and get the jury to feel a lot of sympathy for him. And if you read the UK judgment, there was a bit of that in the UK, but the judge said, here's some research about domestic violence perpetrators. Here's why I don't, with all the evidence I've seen of Johnny Depp's misogynistic language, his physical abuse, his threats, here's why I don't believe what he's saying about being a victim. And a judge has to have a really kind of structured opinion about those things, whereas juries are very different. They're unpredictable. We have no idea what it was that swayed them on this decision. And so, I think having the bench trial versus the jury trial explains a lot of it. Also, the trial took place in Virginia. Neither Johnny Depp nor Amber Heard live in Virginia or have ever lived in Virginia. The reason it was in Virginia, which Johnny Depp's lawyers have almost admitted to in certain interviews, is that they have very different laws about defamation, and it's easier to prove defamation in Virginia. So the thing here is, we're talking about, what we're looking at is kind of a backlash against people speaking up about abuse, a backlash against Me Too, and we're looking at it take place in a legal arena. And there are a few things about this case that make that really worrying, because to run essentially the same trial in two different jurisdictions is not something that is usually allowed. I was really surprised when I read the statement of claim for this case, because of how similar it is to the UK trial and the fact that it was allowed to go forward. That kind of signals to a lot of people around the world that if they have lots of money and a really good legal team, they can kind of keep shopping in different jurisdictions until they get the outcome that they want. As well, and it's confusing because we've got two completely conflicting decisions, and I'm sure you've seen this online. People will just completely, I've spoken to so many people who completely disregard the UK decision and have decided that the US decision is the only one that matters, but that's not how court judgment should work. They are both relevant pieces of information about this issue.
Can you explain why, just very clearly, explain to us, for people who are maybe don't know about it or confused, why evidence suggests from Johnny Depp's agents suggesting that he had apologized for physically allegedly abusing Amber Heard, why that wasn't admissible? Why couldn't that be used as evidence? And also why the jury, I've forgotten the legal term, it's where they're contained so they don't they're not exposed to media coverage. You'll know the term. Because what happened is the jury, obviously, this was an exceptionally high profile trial, and the coverage all over social media was very tilted in one direction. There's no question about that. And, you know, did the jury then engage or see any of that? So those two issues, why wasn't that evidence, why wasn't it admissible, that alleged, what Johnny Depp had allegedly said through agents, and why weren't the jury prevented, as in other trials, from engaging with the media and so on?
So these are two of the most important questions, I think. And to be honest, I think these will be the two questions that end up on appeal. So Amber Heard is appealing this verdict, and these are the legal things that she's challenging. And I think rightly so. I'm very confused by some of the judicial decisions that were made in this case. So to take your first question, in terms of the evidence that the US jury didn't see, of which there was a lot. So in particular, there was contemporaneous medical records of Amber Heard reporting incidences of abuse to her therapist at the time when it happened, dating back to the early 2010s, at the beginning of their relationship. And then in particular, there's a text from Johnny Depp to his personal assistant at the time. The other way around, from his personal assistant to Johnny Depp, saying that he had to tell Johnny Depp that in a kind of drug-induced blackout the night before, he had kicked Amber Heard. And the text says, he was devastated when I told him that he'd kicked you, and he's very sorry. So this is important because a huge part of this trial, both in Amber Heard's testimony and in the expert testimony that we heard, was about the fact that Johnny Depp's substance abuse issues meant that he had several days at a time when he couldn't necessarily remember what had happened. So one of the things that Amber had said was, I'm not even necessarily saying that he's getting up here and saying this never happened and he's deliberately lying. I'm saying he doesn't remember. And I do. And this text is really important to that argument, right? Because it's a contemporaneous piece of documentary evidence with someone close to Johnny Depp confirming that he didn't remember, and also implicitly confirming that this act of physical violence happened and that Johnny Depp was sorry about it. So the jury didn't see that text. And that's because this judge took a very, very, very strict approach to the rules, the hearsay rules of evidence. And I have to look into this a bit more because I've never come across this before. I've in all of my years covering courts, I've never seen an approach this strict. I think there are some things that were going on behind the scenes about disclosure of evidence when those texts were handed over, that perhaps the judge meant that the judge was unable to verify them in time for the trial. I'm not sure about that. But it's very surprising. It's very, very surprising. And I think that those texts really could have led to a different outcome, as well as the medical records. And the second question about the jury not being sequestered, it baffles me, honestly, because sequestering a jury, as you say, is when you basically separate them from society for the duration of a trial. So you put them in a hotel, you make sure that they're not communicating with people outside of the jury. It does happen less and less, but this is the archetypal trial where you would expect the jury to be sequestered. And that's because, as we've seen on the outside, this turned into a complete circus in terms of the hashtag Justice for Johnny Depp gangs on the internet. And also part of Amber Heard's $100 million counterclaim was an accusation that Johnny Depp had led a paid, coordinated social media campaign against her, including these hashtags, Justice for Johnny Depp, hashtag Amber Heard is a psychopath, those kinds of things. That he paid bots and fake accounts to kind of spread this information. So that's a very serious allegation. If you have an allegation that kind of nefarious activity is going on to try and sway the conversation online, it's much more important to sequester the jury. As well as that, so the jury is instructed not to look at social media or do any outside research. It still happens. Juries still do this. We know they still do this. I have no idea if this jury did, but it's possible. But even if they didn't, the thing that, I think this really epitomizes what went wrong here. So there were TikTok videos making fun of Amber Heard's sexual assault allegations against Johnny Depp. She alleged that he assaulted her with a vodka bottle. And there were all these videos online mocking that allegation. But even if the jury didn't, find those online, people turned up in real life in Virginia and acted them out for her while she walked into the courtroom, because they knew that, she probably wasn't looking online, but they really wanted to make sure that she saw it. And, it's possible that the jury saw that as well. So, I feel like this case, we have to let go of this idea that the way cases are being talked about on social media doesn't spill over into the actual justice system, because the fact that people took time out of their day to stand outside court and act out these vicious, nasty, mocking videos of her just shows that, this jury should 100% have been sequestered. And, it's hard to see this verdict as not contaminated by what was happening on social media for this entire trial.
Should also know, and I should apologise for the language here, but what Johnny Depp wrote in text messages about Amber Heard: "I will fuck her burnt corpse afterwards to make sure she's dead. Mushy, pointless, dangling, overused, floppy fish market." Just lurid misogyny, really grotesque misogyny in an objective sense. Obviously, I don't think anyone rational could listen to that and think it's anything other than extreme misogyny. I mean, in terms of the narrative, again, that's come out, and I just want to link this, I guess, the final part, just to Me Too, and I suppose the backlash against what I suppose was a period in which there was at least a consensus that, well, not a consensus, but a broader acceptance that women should be believed if they speak out about male violence that they have endured. And on the basis that from every level of society, women, often on a daily basis, have to suffer these experiences and get no redress, no accountability, nothing. And that there was finally a moment when that could change. And so in terms of this narrative now, there's people say, well, actually, maybe they both abused each other. And they'll say, in terms of how Amber Heard behaved herself. So I'm just interested in that, because obviously, this idea that someone in this context, kind of has that perfection has to be obtained if they're to be believed or accepted. So just interested in that kind of the focus on a lot of Amber Heard's behavior and this idea, well, actually, maybe they both abused each other. That's obviously not what was reflected in the narrative, though. But how that then links to the backlash against the Me Too movement.
Absolutely. So this, I think, is another one of the central questions that we really will need to pay attention to over the coming months and years, because this is going to keep coming up, especially with this, incredibly high-profile precedent. And I think the thing that happened here is that the public were really ready to kind of take delight in the idea that an accuser has been shown to be lying, and therefore that, Me Too has gone too far, and, all of those arguments. But again, it's really hard to square that with the evidence that was presented in this trial, because, just to name a few things, she had 11 witnesses who saw her with bruises. She had a makeup artist who testified that she covered up bruises. She had a witness who saw Johnny Depp hit her firsthand. This is the kind of evidence that most survivors of sexual assault and intimate partner violence do not have. She actually had much more documentary and firsthand evidence than most victims are able to have, and she still lost. So it tells us something about what this backlash will demand of victims who come forward publicly, and it's setting the bar much higher than I ever would have expected personally, in terms of how much evidence a victim has to have in order to prove that abuse happened. And secondly, as you say, there's a substitution going on. What this trial should have been about is, can she substantiate the allegations that she made in the Washington Post? Unless those 11 people lied through the teeth and were all part of a huge coordinated hoax, I think she did prove that at least one instance of abuse happened. But that question was substituted for the question of, does she deserve to be someone who is able to speak out about this kind of thing? And that's where, again, Johnny Depp's team, brought in all this evidence about her character and about other things that she's done, hoping that the jury would focus more on that question, this idea of, does she deserve to be held up as a victim? And that is a problem, because firstly, that's not a legal question. That shouldn't be a question in a court of law. And secondly, it goes to myths about domestic violence and sexual violence that I really thought we had overcome. And that is this idea that in order to have the right to be a victim, you have to be perfect in other ways, and you have to conduct yourself in ways that are beyond reproach. So, we saw all this evidence about things that she's done. I'm sure you've heard about this idea that she said that she would donate all of her divorce settlement to charity, and she hasn't done that yet. People really seized on that, right? And it's, when you're looking at the law, that actually doesn't matter to whether or not she's a victim of abuse. And it was entered into evidence in order to try and get the jury to say, this is not a good enough person, so we're not going to give her the right to speak publicly about this. And that's what the backlash is. I think that's what we're going to see is people trying to attack the credibility of victims outside of the evidence of abuse in order to tap into this idea in society that, victims have to be perfect, or victims have to be kind of likable, in order to be able to speak out. And that really worries me, because again, it's a myth about surviving abuse that I really thought that we'd kind of gotten past, and this trial shows that we absolutely haven't, and that so many people were just waiting to latch onto this argument that she's an imperfect victim.
Just finally, the ramifications of this in terms of what it means for women, because if we look just at Britain alone, it's estimated that 1.4 million women are victims, survivors of domestic abuse every year. And obviously, that's not going into sexual assault. I think it's about 400,000 sexual assaults against women a year, and around 85 to 90,000 women raped a year. Now, obviously, I mean, the argument's been made that if we were to talk about, and obviously I'm separating this from this trial, but just in terms of, what again, whatever people think about the verdicts, the coverage of it and the conclusions being drawn from it, when it comes to women speaking out and being believed, where does this now leave that? Where does it leave it in a country where, I mean, people say rape is essentially decriminalized because the vast majority of men who commit rape, there's no justice at all, let alone sexual assaults or any form of sexual harassment. So where does this leave us? What's your concerns about, again, whatever anyone thinks about this particular trial, what the ramifications will be going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think the ramifications of this will be huge, and even at this point, hard to quantify. I think it's hard to underestimate the impact that this will have. I've, for example, already spoken to a number of women who, since the verdict came down last week, have received notifications that their abusers are suing them for defamation. I've spoken to caseworkers who have clients calling them up now on a daily basis, saying they're now being sued for defamation and asked to prove again their abuse in court. So, this is going to have a trickle-down effect on survivors everywhere. And I think, what you said about putting this in the context of rape being decriminalized, certainly in this country, and the evidence shows, that this is happening in the US as well. And, I think what's important to remember is that the Me Too movement and speaking out about abuse was a response to the fact that the criminal justice system was completely failing to address it. So we have fewer and fewer prosecutions and convictions in terms of both domestic violence and sexual assault. So the Me Too movement was saying, okay, you know, we can't change the justice system. Hopefully, eventually it will change. We as individuals, you know, we can't change the fact that the justice system doesn't take these crimes seriously. So if we speak publicly about it, that is one way to kind of achieve some sort of justice for ourselves. What this kind of movement of strategically using defamation lawsuits to silence victims who choose to do that based on the fact that they don't have mountains of evidence to prove it, even though, as I said, I believe Amber Heard did, you know, that shows that not only will the criminal justice system not kind of acknowledge these crimes, but this is a way for the legal system to be used to shut down, you know, the other form of justice that the Me Too movement wanted, which was being able to speak freely about the things that have happened to us. So, you know, Marilyn Manson, for example, has filed a huge defamation suit against Evan Rachel Wood. And we have people online who have been using the Justice for Johnny Depp hashtag who've now moved over into the Justice for Marilyn Manson camp. So there's a group of people who've been mobilized into this movement that is about, you know, trying to shut down people who are speaking publicly about abuse. And those people are now, you know, moving on to backing Marilyn Manson. And that should be really concerning to us, because we had this kind of one section of society where women could speak about abuse, and we're now seeing that even that is no longer being tolerated, and that the legal system is being used to shut that down as well. And, you know, the more and more defamation suits we see like this, the more concerning it will be. And, you know, I think this has been coming for a long time, this kind of backlash against people being able to tell their stories, especially when you think about the fact that, as you said at the beginning, Johnny Depp was not named in this article. There were no specific allegations in this article. It was very broad. It was very, it was worded in a way that was intended to avoid exactly this outcome. And yet, you know, this is what's happened. So it will have a chilling effect on people being able to speak publicly about abuse, and it already is. And, you know, I think that really concerns me.
Lucia, that was absolutely brilliant, so detailed and thorough, and really just went into the weeds. I think it's so important to talk about the potential consequences and what this means. And I think it's very important as well to have an alternative to the narrative that obviously now has become pretty dominant in the aftermath. But honestly, it's a grim thing to have to talk about, but you did it so wonderfully. So we're so lucky to have you all over again.